Open your textbooks to page 296. Look at Self-Test 17-2, and we're going to be looking at section A, number 4. This is the Mozart Piano Sonata example on page 296. Basically, I just want to walk you through an analysis because it gets a bit tricky when we're looking at real music. There's a lot going on, a lot of non-chord tones, and now that we're introducing secondary functions, there's going to be a lot of accidentals. And there's also some times where we're going to encounter chords that are missing pitches, and we just have to assume that those pitches are there. So there's a little bit of gray area, and I just want to help you understand what that gray area is. So first off, now this is interesting because this again is an excerpt from his piano sonata. The overall key is actually B flat major, but the key that the textbook has given us is F major. And that just basically means that this small excerpt is in F major, but he decided not to change the key signature. So as you can see, F major has only one flat, the B flat. So that means we shouldn't have any E flats there. And if you look through this, you'll notice that the E's are all E naturals. So the E naturals here make that feel like F major. So basically, if we ever were to actually encounter a real E flat in this piece, that would be the non-chord tone. The E naturals are part of F major, so that would be considered diatonic. Okay, so first let's take a look at our first chord. Now we have a D, a B flat, and an A. Now you have to decide what the harmonic rhythm is. Do you think there's one chord that contains this whole measure? Do you think it changes on every eighth note? Do you think it changes on every quarter note? That's just something you have to look for and look at it generally as a musician. Now I would say because of this right hand having half notes, I would say that it changes every half note. So I would say for this first chord, we're looking at the D, B flat, and the A. Now we can pick out these non-chord tones. Look at this A right here. It happens, it's a neighbor tone, right? So I would actually say that that neighbor tone would be a non-chord tone right off the bat because that's just visually what that looks like. So I would highlight that, something like that, and I would label it, let's see, I would label that a N for a neighbor tone. So then we have to look at this chord again. We're left with a B flat and a D. We only have two pitches. So we're going to have to assume that there's another pitch missing. So if we were to stack B and D flat, we would get B flat, D, we would be missing the fifth of the chord, which is the F. So that's what we're going to assume is there. Make sure it makes sense too. In the key of F, B flat would be a 4 chord. Very likely that we could start on a 4 chord. That's a very normal chord. So right there, I would put this as, whoops, if it lets me, I would write a 4 chord here. Okay, 4, and the bass note is this B flat, so we are in root position. Look at the next chord. You also want to be looking for patterns in the music. Notice the bass clef. We have that same 3-note figure. Therefore, I would say that this middle note is always going to be a non-chord tone because that just fits the pattern. So this is going to be a neighbor tone, this B natural here is a neighbor tone, and this C is a neighbor tone. All of those you would label with an N. So then we have the same thing. Here we have a C and an E natural. Now remember, the E natural, even though it has accidentals, is a diatonic pitch because we're in the key of F major. So they're just making that be an F major. So a C, E, we would be missing the G. So therefore this would be a 5 chord. C's in our bass, so that works out well. Check your chords. Does it make sense? 4 can go to 5? Perfect. Next chord, we already said the B natural is a neighbor tone. Now this one's a bit different. We have a C sharp and a B flat. How in the world would we stack that up? So the B flat is diatonic to the key. They only put that there as a courtesy to remind us because we had it natural in the previous measure to remind us that it's back to the key signature. But the C sharp here, that's what's interesting. C sharp is not diatonic to the key of F major. So since we have found an altered pitch, we have to assume that we now have a secondary function. Now, When you have a secondary function, what I like to do is sometimes go to the next chord, skip this chord, and solve the next chord, because that's going to help us decide what our secondary function is. So let's do that. This C is a non-chord tone, it's a neighbor tone, which leaves us with a D and an A. So if we were to stack a D and an A, they are a fifth apart, so we would assume that it's missing the third, which is in F or an F sharp. In this case, an F, because D in the key of F is a 6. So I would say that this is actually going to be a 6 chord. Therefore, what we can expect is this secondary function is going to be a something of 6, because secondary functions always go to their temporary tonic. Okay, so C sharp and B flat. Well, if they're a seventh apart, which makes me think that we're going to have a seventh chord. C sharp, something, something, B flat. Okay, what kind of chord would that be? We only have 2 pitches to work with, so what is the interval from a C sharp to a B flat? That's a diminished seventh, right? The major seventh would be C sharp to B sharp, the minor seventh, C sharp to B, and the diminished seventh, C sharp to B flat. Therefore, because we know that interval, we can assume that the other pitches are going to be an E natural and a G natural, giving us our fully diminished seventh chord. See how that works? How you have to kind of assume that some pitches are there? So, therefore, I'm going to put this, I'm going to make it a 7 diminished, check the inversion. We're in root position, so I'll simply add a 7 of what? Now I'm going to assume that it's a 6, but let's check. So we have a secondary leading tone with C sharp as the root. In what key would C sharp be the leading tone? Simply count up by a minor second. C sharp would be going up to D. And D is the 6th scale degree in F major, making that correct. 7 diminished 7 of 6, leading to its temporary tonic of 6. Actually pretty nice and clean when you sort through all the mess. What about this mess? Look at all those 16th notes. What are we going to do there? It looks like we don't even have a real chord here. There's no substance to that. A chord has to usually be at least more than 1 pitch. So I would just say that this is mostly ornamentation, and I would skip right to the beefy part, this chord right here. I have a G and a B flat, and then all of this stuff in the right hand. What do I distinguish? How can I tell what is a non-chord tone? Well, you definitely want to go by the bass note, because that's the chunky part. That's of the longest duration. So we have a G and a B flat. What can we assume is missing? Well, I would assume it would be G, B flat, and then a D. I would assume the D is missing. So therefore, I'm going to write that chord. G in the key of F is a 2, so I would say 2, 6, because the B flat's in the bass. And then if I went back up now, I can circle my non-chord tones. That would make this C right here. That would be an appoggiatura. This A right here would be a passing tone. What else do we have? And this A, now this one's a little tricky. This would be a suspension, right? Because we have an A, same note going to the A and then resolving down. The question is, what kind of suspension? We have no bass note. So in this case, this is a little wonky, but I would just call it a suspension and not label it. See how easy that was? Always look at the root of the chord. Look at what is holding the bass. And then go back and circle the non-chord tones if you have a passage like this with lots of 16th notes in it. Next, F, A, C natural. That one's pretty easy for once. This would be an F, which is a 1 chord. We have a C in our bass. So that C is going to be 6-4. Now, even though we have an accidental at the C natural, it's still diatonic to our key signature. Okay, I am going to skip ahead really quick because I want to get to the juicy part of this. Well, 1-6-4 we know always goes to what? It's a cadential movement, so that 1-6-4 is going to be a 5-7. You can double check that, but whenever you see that, just know that that's what that is. So I want to skip to this chord right here. What do we have here? We have an E flat. Now, E flat does not belong to F major. Even though it's in our key signature, the key signature is lying in this example. So we're looking at the key signature of F. E flat is an altered pitch. So we have some sort of secondary function. Now, what I told you, I like to go ahead and go to the next chord. But look at this. In this chord, we have an F sharp, which is also an altered pitch. Therefore, we have to assume that what we have here is a sequence of circle of fifths using secondary functions. So we have 2 in a row. So then I'll go to the next chord. What is this one? G, B, and a D. Simple. G, B, D, that is going to be our 2 chord. Okay? Now back it up. I'm going to assume that whatever secondary function this is going to have a temporary tonic of 2. So I have F sharp, A, C, and a D. That stacks up perfectly. D, F sharp, A, C, which gives me a major minor 7th chord. So we're working with a secondary dominant. So I'm going to put here a 5, 6, 5, right? Because the third of the chord is the bass note, that F sharp, of what? Well, I'm going to assume it's a 2, but let's double check. What tonic would make D a perfect, the dominant? You basically want to count up a perfect fourth from D, which would give us G, which is a 2 in the key of F major. Now let's back it up one more. What do we have here? We have an F, A, and an E flat. If we were to stack that, we would be missing the C. So again, we have another secondary dominant, which I am going to label as a 5, F-A-C-E, 5, 7 of what? So F is the root, count up a perfect fourth, which would give us F, G, A, B flat, which is a 4 in the key of F. Now this one, if you look, actually does lead to this and creates the circle of fifth sequence because we have the F going to a D. And that's basically it. So that's basically how you pick apart these examples. You have to do a lot of assumptions, a lot of looking at, well, what is the big picture? What parts of these do you think actually belong and which are just ornamentation? Okay, so let me send you off to do some of your own now.